we're going to go to Wyoming next.
Yeah, Jerry Altermatt. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. So yes, I'm a terrestrial habitat biologist for the game and fish. And it's great to see the amount of diversity here from all the presenters this morning. I think I'll probably bring a little more diversity, and my presentation will be probably a fairly unique perspective compared to the rest of them, as I think I'm the only state wildlife management agency represented here.
We have one more.
Okay, great. So our mission is conserving wildlife and serving people. And we have a strategic plan that guides our actions in the state. And I pulled out two of our plan goals to kind of illustrate, what our agency's relationship is to beavers. And the first one is encourage and promote diverse fish and wildlife-based experience for all users. So we are responsible for the direct management of the species itself for the experience of users, whether that be consumptive users or non-consumptive users. And consumptive users, of course, would be trapping. And like many of the folks have said, and I think the slide that was shown from Washington is illustrative of what's going on west-wide, and that recreational use of beavers is not nearly what it used to be, mostly because of the market price for furs is way down. So we don't have a lot of recreational use of beavers. So probably the more important relationship that we have with beavers is in that second goal there, which is to conserve and protect diverse and sustainable habitat for fish and wildlife. So, more importantly than managing the recreational use of beavers, we're really managing them as a tool to improve habitat for other species for recreational experiences. Jackie, how is my connection? Are we hearing me okay? Am my video okay?
We can hear you great.
Okay, I'll go ahead and keep my video on then. So if we can go to the next slide. So not too much differently than other states, beavers in Wyoming are classified as fur bearers, and the state is divided up into trapping areas. The vast majority of the state is open to unlimited take, and that is from October through April. There are currently 5 areas in the state that are closed, and the reason for these closures varies, but mostly because low populations in those areas, and some of those were restoration areas where we did translocations of beavers and close those areas off until we have a viable population. And there's currently, this is probably very unique, I think, in the West, we have 9 areas that are limited quota. So there's a random draw, 1 trapper selected for each one of those areas. And then there's a quota, a number of beavers that he can take during that season. And that ranges from 10 to 30 beavers. And what is interesting here is that in most of these areas and in most years, those permits are actually held by people that have no intention of trapping. I mean, it's a strategy to not take beavers out of these watersheds. So people apply for these permits that are not going to trap. So under our state statute, landowners can take beavers if they're causing damage. There's fairly specific language in the statute that they can take them if they are flooding meadows, damming irrigation systems, or constructing dams or ponds, which would be dangerous to livestock. And even though there is fairly specific language, I think that most game wardens are fairly liberal on how they treat that take. Excuse me. There's probably more beavers taken in this way than there are during the trapping season. And those beaver have to be, of course, lethally taken. They cannot be live trapped. So in Wyoming, live trapping is done only under a permit we call a Chapter 10 or a Chapter 33 permit. And those typically do not go to individuals. We do have one NGO, Wyoming Wetland Society, in Jackson, Wyoming, that does have a permit to live trap and move beaver. But most of the live trapping, majority of live trapping that's done in Wyoming is done by department personnel. And these are typically done by our habitat biologists throughout the state. And that is pretty much up to the habitat biologists and how much interest they have in doing that. So the level of translocations varies throughout the state, kind of depending on how interested that individual is in doing it. So if we could have the next slide, please. So I've highlighted a couple of our biggest challenges. And one of our biggest challenges is that, as most of you know, translocations are most successful when at least a mated pair are moved together. And so when you're trapping, you have to have a place to temporarily hold all these individuals in that family that you're trapping until you have the entire family trapped. You can move them as a group. And that can take 1 to 2, sometimes even 3 weeks to trap an entire family. And so this becomes a bottleneck in our program because most of our regions are using a setup, as you see in that top picture. We have a mobile holding facility, a trailer mounted facility that we're holding these beaver in. And of course, you can only hold one family in these trailers at a time. And so you're taking about 2 to 3 weeks to trap a family, or trapping. The live trapping season is fairly short. We only do it in a month in the spring and a month and a half to 2 months in the fall. And so that really is limiting how many beaver we can translocate each year. So statewide, on average, we're only transporting about 12 beavers each year. And because of our setups, many of those are not paired. We spend a couple of weeks and decide it's not worth the time and effort to try to catch that second beaver. And anybody who's done this kind of work knows that after the first few beaver are caught, it becomes more and more difficult to catch additional beaver in that colony because they become trap shy. So we are working on a solution to that problem. We are investigating options of building permanent multifamily holding facilities, something similar to, for those that are familiar with what the Methow Beaver Project is doing in Washington, where they're using an abandoned fish hatchery. We would actually build a purpose-built concrete hatchery structure, if you want to call it that, to house multiple families of beavers. And not only would that enable us to be trapping at 4 different locations at one time or more, but that would also enable us to do some matchmaking at the facility so that if we don't catch pairs, we can create a pair at the facility and then release them as a pair. And then just very quickly, a couple of the other challenges that we have is a lack of public awareness about ecological roles and the benefits of beaver. And this is on both ends, on both the trapping end and the release end of the program. So on the trapping end, we get a lot of calls that, people are having beaver problems, and we go take a look at it and we think, well, gosh, these beaver are actually doing a lot of good here. Is it possible for you to find a way just to resolve that conflict? And we probably have a little bit different demographics than the rest of the states that are presenting here this morning. And I think a lot of, it's an education problem. And I think that it is changing, but there are still a lot of people that just do not understand the ecological benefits of beaver. And of course, on the other end of it, where we want to put beavers, there's a lot of streams that, are very, would be a high priority to put beavers, but we have a landowner that is not interested at all in having beavers there. And then the last one quickly is just the time constraints. Anybody who's done this knows, especially on the trapping side of things, that it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of blood and sweat to trap beavers. And for a lot of habitat biologists that are busy with other things, this is just a hard thing to fit into their schedules. So next slide, please. So I'll highlight one of the successes that we've had. And this Actually comes from my region here in Cody. On Grass Creek. Grass Creek historically had beavers. They disappeared around the year 2008 for unknown reasons. They may have been illegally trapped. I say illegally because most of Grass Creek is on private land or state land, and the private landowner does not allow trapping. And in Wyoming, you can't trap on state lands unless you have written permission from the state land board. But at any rate, they disappeared, whether it was from illegal trapping or disease or whatever, and they did not come back. It's somewhat isolated habitat. So between the fall of 2019 and the spring of 2021, we translocated 15 beavers, and those were from 2 families and 8 singles from 10 different trapping locations. As of this last spring, there were 15 new dams that were associated with 4 different dam complexes. And we will continue to monitor those to determine if they're still occupied. And if they're not, we will supplement them with additional translocations. And one thing maybe to note here is that, this is an area that we're not that concerned about protecting from trapping by having to close the area, because it is de facto closed because of the private lands and the state lands protection. And that is all I have.
Jerry, thanks so much. There were a couple of things in particular I was excited to hear about. One, that your agency is looking at building a beaver facility to have greater, success, as you describe the challenges of being able to trap them, that it takes 1 to 2, sometimes 3 weeks, and wanting to be able to translocate the whole family and needing a holding facility. So it's just great to hear that Wyoming is thinking about that. And then I also thought that was really great that you had areas where the state has closed down trapping because you had low population. So that tells me a couple of things there. One, you must be tracking and trying to understand what the beaver populations are. Otherwise, you wouldn't know that there was low populations and be able to close it down. And that's really great news, just from the perspective that other states aren't tracking beaver populations at all that I'm aware of. And so it's just great to hear that Wyoming is doing that and looking at taking proactive measures when they know that the populations are low, and it'd be more beneficial to have them higher. So that was great to hear. Thanks very much for being with us.